The House of Commons was boiling. The air felt heavier than usual, not from the heat, but from the weight of accusation. Opposition benches thundered with outrage, their voices echoing across the chamber. And at the center of it all, the Prime Minister stood, his face unshaken, as if the entire storm around him were just noise. The charge. A single statement that had exploded across the country. The Prime Minister has committed to moving $1 trillion of Canadian private investment to the United States. $1 trillion. The number alone was enough to silence the gallery for a brief second before chaos erupted again. Across Canada, headlines screamed. Investors panicked. Economists debated. Ordinary citizens wondered whether their country was being quietly hollowed out. And yet, when the Prime Minister rose to speak, he carried the same calm tone that infuriated his critics even more. He said Canada had the best trade deal in the world, one that was alive, evolving, and meant to protect workers. But the opposition wasn't buying it. They pointed to the numbers: shrinking GDP, rising unemployment, and an alarming flight of capital. What kind of deal protects workers? One MP shouted, when those very workers are losing their jobs. The Prime Minister countered, promising a generational investment budget that would, in his words, rebuild the backbone of the Canadian economy. But his words only seemed to ignite more fury. Because behind the political theater lay a bitter truth. Money was leaving Canada, fast. Corporations were shifting plants south. Tech investments were drying up. Oil and gas producers were closing wells. Every announcement from Washington sounded like a new opportunity for Americans. Every new regulation in Ottawa sounded like a warning for Canadians. And when reporters asked why investors were fleeing, the answer came in whispers: because it's safer there now.
Before moving forward, do subscribe for Parliament updates.
In Parliament, the debate turned venomous. The opposition accused the government of surrendering the country's
Here
future,
in Tofield, Alberta,
of handing over the tools
and I
of
have to tell you,
prosperity
there
in
are an
exchange for
incredible
hollow
number
promises.
of people who are
benefits?
just scraping
One MP
by.
yelled,
I am
when
amazed
Canada loses
at
$1
how
trillion of private
inflation
investment.
continues to
Who benefits when our
march
energy
along
stays
and
locked
run over
underground
everyone
while
in
the
its
Americans
path.
expand
Yesterday
theirs?
I was in Camrose. I
That
spoke
line
to
drew applause, loud,
Boston
sustained,
Pizza
and sharp.
the
Prime
waitress.
Minister, unfazed,
Her name is
leaned
Rhonda,
forward.
single mom. She says every
Canada,
month
he
it
said,
gets worse
will
and
never
worse
be
and worse.
bullied
The
into
price is
short-term
rising
politics.
faster than her
We're
wages,
building long-term strength,
and she's
not
struggling.
surrender.
She's just
But as he
fighting
spoke,
to
even
feed her
some
kids
government backbenchers
and
exchanged uneasy looks. The words long-term strength sounded noble, but to many Canadians it meant long-term waiting. The heart of the clash was more than policy. It was pride. Canada's identity, as a country that builds, exports, and stands independent, was now on trial. And at the center of it was that $1 trillion question. Had the Prime Minister accidentally revealed a plan to shift Canada's wealth abroad? Or was it a strategic move, a partnership designed to bring back even greater investment later? No one knew. But the optics were brutal. Then came the energy debate, the part that lit the chamber like wildfire. The opposition slammed the government's energy cap, accusing it of choking Alberta's oil production while the U.S. expanded its pipelines and drilling. They held up the Keystone XL pipeline as a symbol of what Canada could have had, if only its leaders had the will. While our American allies are building pipelines and refineries, an Alberta MP shouted, our Prime Minister is building barriers and bureaucracy. The government benches erupted, some in defense, others in disbelief. The Prime Minister shot back. We are working with provinces, with the private sector, to unlock our energy potential, responsibly, sustainably, and profitably.
The Prime Minister came home empty-handed with more tariffs on softwood and automobiles, but he made a massive promise of $1 trillion of investment that would leave Canada to go to the United States. He said that this would be part of the agreement that he expects to get. So right in the agreement, he's going to commit to moving $1 trillion out of Canada. Yesterday he confirmed it would be private money. So how is he planning to do that? Is he going to pass a law forcing our pension funds to move their money south? Or is he just going to continue with high tax and anti-development policies that cause investment to flee?
But the opposition wasn't letting go. They accused him of playing both sides, green enough to please environmental activists, but dependent enough on oil revenues to keep Alberta quiet. It was a tightrope act, one that no leader had managed to walk successfully in decades. And yet, the stakes had never been higher. With the U.S. under President Trump pushing aggressive industrial expansion, Canada faced a crossroads: follow Washington's lead, or chart its own course through uncertain waters. In every newsroom, every economic forum, one question dominated the airwaves. Was Canada's government fighting for the economy, or fighting against it? And as that question hung in the air, the camera panned across the parliamentary floor, faces flushed, papers flying, applause and outrage clashing in every direction. In that single moment, it was clear. This wasn't just a debate about trade. It was a struggle for Canada's economic soul. By the next morning, the debate had spilled far beyond the walls of Parliament. Every news channel, every talk show, every cafe from Vancouver to Halifax buzzed with the same question. Did the Prime Minister really just give away Canada's future? In the capital, protesters gathered outside the Parliament buildings holding signs that read, "Keep Canadian jobs in Canada," and "Stop the trillion-dollar sellout." The mood had shifted, not just politically but emotionally. For the first time in years, the public wasn't just watching politics, they were feeling it. Inside the House, tension reached a breaking point. The opposition leader rose again, voice echoing through the chamber. "Mr. Speaker, this government has done the unthinkable. It has written a blank check to the United States with Canadian money, and the Prime Minister calls it partnership." Thunderous applause followed. The Prime Minister stood slowly, papers in hand, waiting for the noise to fade. His expression was controlled, almost too calm. He began, "We are not sending money. We are sending opportunity. Canadian investors are expanding globally, and that means returns for Canadians." The words sounded polished. But to many watching, they rang hollow. An MP from British Columbia shot back, expanding globally. "Sir, our mills are closing. Our workers are packing up and leaving. Expansion for who?" The chamber shook again with shouting. The Speaker had to stand twice to restore order. As the noise settled, the Prime Minister tried to pivot toward the upcoming generational investment budget. He promised record spending on green tech, infrastructure, and advanced manufacturing. "This is about creating the Canada of the future," he said, "a Canada that builds the energy of tomorrow, not the pollution of yesterday." But the opposition was ready. "Then why," one MP fired back, "are we watching the U.S. revive its oil, gas, and steel sectors while ours are dying under your carbon caps and red tape?" That line hit deep. The Prime Minister paused, just long enough for cameras to capture it. He replied, "Because leadership means making hard choices. And our choice is to lead the world in clean energy." But the answer didn't calm anyone. For those in the struggling energy provinces, it sounded like a sermon from another planet. In Alberta, the Premier held an emergency press conference, accusing Ottawa of killing Canadian energy with a smile. Business leaders echoed the sentiment, warning that the country was on the verge of an investment winter. And then came the leak. Late one evening, documents surfaced suggesting that government advisors had discussed strategic investment relocation, effectively encouraging Canadian capital to partner with U.S. industries for mutual gain. The phrase "mutual gain" spread like wildfire.
Mr. Speaker, I was there. And I was there in the conversation with the President. I was there in the conversations in the Oval Office. I was there in the conversations afterwards. And the situation is this. We have the best deal in the world. We're in the process of making it better for the workers in the steel sector, for the workers in the aluminum sector, for our energy workers, for our auto workers, for our workers in forest products, for our workers across this great land, because we believe in Canada. We will not rest till we have the best deal.
Opposition MPs waved the documents in Parliament demanding answers. The Prime Minister denied wrongdoing, insisting it was routine economic planning, a collaboration, not capitulation. But the damage was done. The words "strategic relocation" became the headline of the week. Behind the scenes, insiders whispered that the Prime Minister's team was split. Some believed the cross-border investments would bring dividends and jobs back to Canada later. Others warned that once capital left, it rarely returned. The crisis deepened when energy executives revealed that 2 major pipeline projects had been suspended indefinitely. Investors blamed regulatory uncertainty and political hostility. The opposition seized the moment. They framed it as proof that Ottawa's policies weren't just hurting the economy, they were driving it off a cliff. Under this government, one fiery MP roared, "Investment doesn't flow south, it flees south." Even veteran politicians admitted they hadn't seen Parliament this divided in years. Every exchange felt personal. Every statement turned into a headline. The Prime Minister doubled down. He unveiled a plan to pour billions into renewable infrastructure, promising that green industries would replace lost oil and gas revenue within a decade. But critics pointed out that Canada's most affected workers didn't have 10 years, they had rent due next month. The Prime Minister's approval ratings began to wobble. The opposition leader, smelling blood, framed the crisis as a betrayal of working Canadians. He reminded voters of every shuttered mill, every job outsourced, every promise that never materialized. The political chessboard was shifting. Then came a dramatic turn. During question period, a senior Liberal MP broke ranks, calling for clarity and transparency on the alleged trillion-dollar investment plan. The chamber froze. For a split second, even the Prime Minister's expression changed. The rebellion had begun from within. The opposition benches erupted in cheers. The Speaker's gavel slammed repeatedly, but the uproar drowned him out. Outside, journalists described it as the moment the government lost control of the narrative. The next morning, editorial headlines were brutal. A trillion-dollar gamble. Economic patriotism or economic suicide. Canada at the crossroads. But beyond politics, something deeper was stirring, a sense of awakening among ordinary Canadians. People were starting to connect the dots: trade, energy, jobs, taxes, all part of a bigger picture. A picture that suddenly looked uncertain, even fragile. As evening fell over Ottawa, the Prime Minister met privately with his advisors. Cameras caught only the silhouette through frosted glass, hands moving, voices raised. No statement followed. But insiders claimed the meeting lasted late into the night. And one phrase was reportedly repeated again and again. If we lose the economy, we lose the country. The stakes could not have been clearer. What began as a parliamentary shouting match had become a national reckoning, one that would define the future of Canada's trade, its energy, and perhaps its very identity. The next chapter was no longer just about policy. It was about survival, political, economic, and national. The next morning, Canada woke to silence. No speeches. No statements. No spin. Just a single breaking headline. Prime Minister to address the nation. At 8 p.m., every screen in the country flickered to life. The Prime Minister stood at the podium, no applause, no crowd, just the weight of a nation watching. He looked straight into the camera. For weeks, we have debated numbers, $1 trillion, trade deficits, tax cuts. But behind those numbers are people. Canadian people. And I will never allow their future to be traded away. The words landed like thunder. Even his critics went silent for a moment.
Mr. Speaker, what we have is the fastest shrinking economy in the G7 with the second highest unemployment, and he was there. So he has a duty to tell the Canadians who are the owners of this $1 trillion that he wants to push out of our country, what is in this deal? Because he said it would actually be in the agreement, that he's going to move $1 trillion of private money south. So there's two ways to do that. Is he going to pass a law forcing investors to sell Canadian investments, putting people out of work here, and invest in the South? Or is he going to continue to kill jobs with high taxes and anti-development policies that send money away?
The opposition benches erupted in cheers. The Speaker's gavel slammed repeatedly, but the uproar drowned him out. Outside, journalists described it as the moment the government lost control of the narrative. The next morning, editorial headlines were brutal. $1 trillion gamble. economic patriotism or economic suicide. Canada at the crossroads. But beyond politics, something deeper was stirring, a sense of awakening among ordinary Canadians. People were starting to connect the dots: trade, energy, jobs, taxes, all part of a bigger picture. A picture that suddenly looked uncertain, even fragile. As evening fell over Ottawa, the Prime Minister met privately with his advisers. Cameras caught only the silhouette through frosted glass, hands moving, voices raised. No statement followed. But insiders claimed the meeting lasted late into the night. And one phrase was reportedly repeated again and again. If we lose the economy, we lose the country. The stakes could not have been clearer. What began as a parliamentary shouting match had become a national reckoning, one that would define the future of Canada's trade, its energy, and perhaps its very identity. The next chapter was no longer just about policy. It was about survival, political, economic, and national. The next morning, Canada woke to silence. No speeches. No statements. No spin. Just a single breaking headline. Prime Minister to address the nation. At 8 p.m., every screen in the country flickered to life. The Prime Minister stood at the podium, no applause, no crowd, just the weight of a nation watching. He looked straight into the camera. For weeks, we have debated numbers, $1 trillion, trade deficits, tax cuts. But behind those numbers are people. Canadian people. And I will never allow their future to be traded away. The words landed like thunder. Even his critics went silent for a moment. He announced a bold reversal, a new Canadian Investment Retention Act, aimed at keeping capital and energy development inside Canada. New incentives for domestic industry. Tax breaks for provinces hit hardest. And, in a stunning twist, a call for national unity talks with every premier. It was a gamble, part redemption, part desperation. But it worked. Within hours, markets steadied. The loonie climbed. For the first time in weeks, headlines shifted from outrage to anticipation. Outside Parliament, the same protesters who'd demanded his resignation now chanted, "Protect Canada." The opposition, caught off guard, accused him of backtracking, but deep down, everyone knew something had changed. The storm had forced the government to confront reality, and the country to remember what was truly at stake. Because this was never just about trade, or energy, or money. It was about Canada itself, its sovereignty, its pride, and its place in a world where economic power meant survival. As the broadcast ended, the Prime Minister paused, looked down at his notes, and then into the lens once more. His final words echoed across the nation. Canada doesn't run from its future. We build it, right here, at home. And with that, the screen faded to black. A speech that began as damage control had become something else entirely, a turning point. For better or worse, a new chapter in Canada's story had begun.
Canada debates.